Hola chicos, ¿cómo le va? Me habla español un poquito, so now I will continue to speak in English. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be in Argentina. It's been one of my dreams for many years to come to this country. Unfortunately, I've seen most of it, in a very small radius around this conference venue, but it's been a great thing to be here. And also to spend some time talking about, okay, it's all up, some things that I've been thinking about. Before I get to what that is, I want to talk a little bit about who I am and a little bit about my journey into this world of design. I, like some others had mentioned here, actually had a first career. I've been around long enough to be one of those people that actually entered this without any schooling. The jobs that I didn't even know existed probably weren't even there. And then I started as a filmmaker. I spent almost my entire 20s working in the film industry as a cinematographer on films. And then at some point I decided, you know what, I really want to be able to make my own and to write. So I went to graduate school and studied screenwriting and got my master's, where I continued to write for many years. But while, of course, you're in school, you need to work. And while I was working, I supported myself doing information graphic design. I was always a designer, not trained, but I loved design very much. And it was on those early sort of computer graphics programs like Corel Draw. Does anyone remember that? So that was very fun. And one day, and that actually led to me actually teaching software. Because I became really good at it and learning this stuff, even database design. And one day while I was at a job, because it was very good, while I was finishing school and writing my screenplays, someone walked in at this company that I was working at and said, "Oh, we'd like to introduce you to this information architect we've just hired. He's a very creative person." And I was like, "What's that? That sounds awesome." And this is very true. And so I said, well, I had never even heard of it before. And so I went home and looked it up and read a book over that same weekend and said, oh my God, I could totally do this. This is exactly what the thought process is of storytelling and screenwriting and figuring out what information to keep in, what information to take out. So it made sense. And I just started, I said, this is a much better job while I'm still trying to peddle my art. And so that's how I fell into this world, and it slowly shifted to my center of focus to the point where I started to work in the agency world. I live in New York, and a lot of the many jobs in New York are at agencies. I worked at a digital agency. Eventually became a creative director, and throughout that evolution also became very interested in strategy, experience strategy, all sorts. I find it really critical for teams when trying to define where to focus and also unify around a common purpose and what it is we're trying to do for users. And that strategy started to shift as the world changed, where companies were no longer just asking us about, can you help us create this thing, this product, this website, whatever. They were actually trying to figure out how they can do this themselves. How can they actually bring this capability into their organizations, because it wasn't enough to just build something. It needed to be maintained. They needed to have processes and systems in place in order to help sustain it. And so I became very interested in, from a strategic point of view, helping organizations become better at creating great user experiences for people, and that actually led to this broader idea of the customer experience. And then, as was mentioned earlier, my most recent role was in a group that was focused on business transformation. And almost like a management consultant, I don't know if you use that same word here, where we would go in and create strategies looking at an entire customer life cycle, customer journey, and where they could improve efforts and what kind of capabilities would be required to get them there. So that's my unexpected evolution. And then suddenly I find myself out of the agency world just 1 year ago to my first in-house role at MasterCard. And it was always where I wanted to go, more recently because I realized that it's better to be in to help companies understand what those issues are and to be part of the team inside. So it's been a very interesting journey. I couldn't have even thought that this role would have existed. In fact, it was a newly created role. It didn't exist before. And so I feel very fortunate to be in a position to finally to help think through, well, what does it even mean? To actually be able to define it. So because that's kind of where my head is at right now, I was trying to think of, well, if I'm going to talk and, reflect on my experience so far and some observations that I've had, what could I talk about that would possibly be useful or interesting? And that's what I want to share. Now, I'm going to warn you, this is not going to be a practical talk. This is not going to be something you're going to be able to take back to the office and say, yes, I have this technique. I'm going to use it on Monday. Instead, I want you to step out of your roles for a minute. The great thing about conferences is that we're all here with our community. We're focused in and really deeply immersed in what we do and how we can do it better. And it's great to be with people because maybe when we're at a company, we don't feel so much of that community. So it's great to be here. But now, if we can just take a moment, and I love this, and just kind of look. Do you know what this is, by the way? Does anyone know? It's such awesome, right? But just step out of your world and think of it rather from the inside out, but the outside in. And I hope that this will actually start to help you think about where companies are going, what the role is of UX in design, and how that could play. So I want to start with a little bit of a story about when I first joined MasterCard. Sorry. I always hate holding glasses. I'm afraid I'm going to break it. So when I joined, their first thought was, we think we need someone to help us do all these things. They knew it was important. They already had an executive mandate to build on their capabilities to make better digital products. MasterCard, if you are unaware, is not a bank. It is a technology company, and at least that's how they're talking about themselves. MasterCard creates the technology that banks consume around a lot of digital products related to the credit cards that you use and other types of banking products. But we are not a bank, and technology is at the core of what we do, but we were not, while we were very, very advanced when it comes to the processing network and systems on that technology point of view. We were all actually very, very behind. We were like in high school level when it came to product design and delivering better consumer experiences across the board. We were also failing at how we treat our customers. It's a very B2B to C business because what we do goes through the banks and ends up in to the consumer's hands. So they said, we think the role is user experience and design. And because of what I was doing before and all the companies that I had worked with, I said, I don't think it's that, because that's redundant. User experience to me is design. Would you all agree? Right? Okay, so why would you have two forms of design? And I said, what you're really thinking about, I think, is the customer experience. And it's something that's more about how the whole organization needs to come together and think about what they're doing in this area. And they said, okay, fine. That was like, okay, that's great. And then we started this journey internally to help build out a practice and a model for what this means inside of a company. And since then, I've been going to conferences for customer experience professionals as well. And what I've noticed is that there's two different conversations happening, very distinct. And what we're doing is we're not talking enough about the relationship between customer experience as a whole and design. And that's what I'm feeling very passionate about, and I feel lucky that I'm in a role to help to try and tie that together. So what does that actually mean? So this is where we should think about it from the perspective of other people inside your company, from business leaders and how they're seeing the world. And as I was saying, so we have these two camps, and some of them are talking about very different things. They're going to conferences, and they're not actually speaking the same language. Is anyone here at this conference consider themselves working in customer experience, for example? If you do, raise your hand. Yeah, there are a few of you. Do you notice the same issue? Yes? Maybe? Okay. And there are very few design people who tend to go to these CX conferences. And in fact, what I found in the organization, and this, I love your language piece, Abby, because I think it's so critical, is people are using these words interchangeably, and they'll say UX when they mean CX, and they'll mean and not even know what they're saying. And so we have to step back and really define what it is we mean. And I always bring up this slide. I probably use it in 50% of my presentations because it always starts with, I'm going to say something, but we probably mean something different. So what do we actually mean? We can nod our heads and say, yeah, we understand what user experience is. To some people, user experience is just the UI. How many of you have experienced that bias in your organization? Right? It's just the people who do the interfaces. And people are having a hard time in general just understanding this. So how do you deal with that challenge, and what does that actually mean? To give you, for those of you who may be less familiar with this, a simple breakdown of what I would see the things that CX people talk about versus UX. This is not a comprehensive list, but just some representative examples. And I won't talk through all of these, but there's some clear overlaps. The idea of journey mapping, experience mapping. Sometimes we call it experience mapping. There's the idea of voice of customer and understanding, research. But the biggest difference that I'm finding is that CX has a very strong business lens, and generally UX will have mostly, and it does extend out of product, depending on what your context of practice is, but it largely has a product lens. And that's the general bias that we're seeing. So to help you understand, or to even think through, well, what is the relationship? Do these two have to be separate? It doesn't really make sense when I think about it, because of the overlap and because of the synergies and the ways they can support each other. But before I get to that, I want to talk about this idea of, well, what is customer experience anyway? Getting closer to a definition. And this is what I've been talking about inside of the organization, and also, why should we even care? Fortunately, I'm in a position where it's less about convincing people at the highest levels of leadership that they need to do this. They get it, but they don't know how. And they're quite not sure what it involves yet, but they definitely want to know how. And I usually start with this idea that, and this is what is central to both views of the world, if you will, is that great customer experience starts with an unmet need, and really identifying that in all sorts of places, large and small, and really being attuned to a person, a human, and putting them at the center of everything that you do. Customer experience feels that way as well. And I like to bring up this example because it's interesting to talk about. And I don't know how many of you, if anyone has been in New York, but this is probably universal. It's sometimes hard to find a taxi, right? You get out, maybe there's one, maybe it's raining. Well, in New York City, there's a very particular occurrence that happens, and that is at around 5 p.m. every day. When people are getting out of work and they want to get into a taxi, it happens to be the hardest time to find the taxi. Does anyone know why? Who's from? Everyone's taking taxi. No, the taxi system has a changeover. So all the taxis that you see are driving by because they're going home. And it doesn't make sense. And this is the taxi, it's like, whoa, so who's actually thinking about the whole experience of the taxi system, right? So I use this as a great example, and I don't know if this was the insight or this was the impetus at all, but to me, this is, if you spotted something like that, this is an opportunity for a great product, right? There's something that can solve for that. And digital, in particular, is what helps us do something like that, and maybe we could end up with a service like Uber. And I bring up Uber because, does it exist in Buenos Aires or here? It's coming. You may or may not like, if you've heard of the company in the news, you may not like them as a company, but as a service, it's pretty incredible. And it has, just because of how easy and simple it is, I love the fact that I was on a trip in Portland and I was able to call an Uber for my daughter and her babysitter while I was there to pick them up and take her to a practice that easily because they didn't have money and it was already paid for and all they had to do was get in and get out. That's awesome, right? And it's that whole, what we referred to a lot in customer experience, the end-to-end experience. It's from the moment you call the car to the moment you get out of the door and when you're billed later. Also, what's interesting about Uber, and I've spoken to some of their drivers, is they have a fantastic driver experience. They treat them really well. They actually protect them in a way with the way this whole system is designed. So, and it goes both ways because you know that you don't want to pick up someone who has bad ratings in the same way that, you know, you'll be able to rate the driver back. But when you look at this, is this an example of a great customer experience or an example of a great user experience? Both, right. Okay, good. So let's see, it's both. And you might say that the user experience is largely in the apps, so or not, depending on your point of view. We have a service at MasterCard, it's called Concierge, and it's for certain card holders who, the fancier card levels, who get this service where they can call to get travel advice or recommendations or help with, any number of things. And so it's definitely a direct customer experience things, particularly if you think of it's a human-human contact. But someone in the company had recognized that the agents were having a lot of trouble because when someone made a call, they actually had two different websites in front of them. They were looking at the consumer-facing website, trying to find recommendations for restaurants, et cetera, that was actually working horribly to begin with, and it was taking a lot of time and therefore producing a bad customer experience. And what they realized is, if we fix the system that the agents use to then make it easier for them to find those recommendations, that'll reduce the time of the call and that will make it much easier. And it was unbelievable, a very simple, not expensive change, and it improved the satisfaction ratings enormously just by something like this. User experience, customer experience, still probably both, right? There's a user experience involved as well. When I was in Chile, this is my year of going to South America. I've been very excited. So I was in Chile earlier this year and staying at, I can't remember what hotel it was right now, but it was a great thing when you're thinking about hotels. They really, some of them excel incredibly when it comes to customer experiences. They're thinking of the thread count of the sheets and the way you're greeted when you walk in the door and every last step of that person, your customer, and what they're doing at the hotel. And I love this example because it's one that you don't really think about, but most of the time I travel a lot, you go to a hotel and there's often a robe, if it's a good hotel, but where do you normally find the robe? Sorry? Like in the bathroom? Oh, well, you haven't been to the hotels I've been to. But no, I find that most of the time I find the robes in the closet. And you have to go out and get it. So this was one case where it was actually right next to the shower. It made sense. When I get out of the shower, I'd want to put on my robe. And there was also a reminder that, by the way, you could get a massage. Oh, that's perfect, because I'm thinking I'm relaxing, maybe this is time, or I'll do it later, rather than leave it up to someone to go think of it on their own and then open the book in the hotel to get a service later. And to me, this is an example of how content is really key when it comes to customer experiences. So, is that experience designed? Does it happen by accident? How does that happen? And that's another example of good user experience or customer experience. What would you say? Customer experience. Okay, so there is some clarity, and I think it's important not to mesh them too much, because there's reason from an organizational point of view to be able to talk about these things in a way that makes sense. Another example is, we have ads that are out there in the world for priceless surprises. You might see them, there's a lot in Latin America. And at the end of that, there's a call to action asking you to go to if you can get a priceless surprise, if you also have a MasterCard, so go sign up for one. If you were someone to actually do that and go to the website to figure out how to sign up for a card, guess what? It's a miserable experience. It's the worst thing ever. So how do all these connect across? Is that a customer experience or user experience issue? Probably both, right? So these are just interesting things to think about, and unfortunately, the picture is a little bit blown out here, but there are gray boxes on the back which form a sort of map. What customer experience people love are this idea of really mapping the journey. We do that, I know we have experience maps as well, but this is just an example of a case where for an American telecommunications company, I guess they're still up there, but we mapped the end-to-end journey to understand where customers, the most valued customers, were actually going, what touch points were relevant to this company, and then examined and really measured, like, what's happening today? How are they working? What does it look like after I actually purchase this service versus later when I'm a customer? And as you all know, most of the time, each part of this journey is probably done by some different part of the organization, right? And the experience looks that way. So who's really responsible for thinking through that and driving consistency and making sure that those pieces connect? Is that a customer experience issue or a user experience issue? So the way we talk about things is that today's world, it's not just about the interaction with a single product. And I'll use McAfee as an example because there was a presentation about that earlier. I would argue that as good as the product can be for any company, it's not just the product that's actually going to win you loyal customers, but it's actually every single touch point you have with the company. It's when you call them up for service. It's when you get something later, or how an update happens. There could be a number of different things, and every company is different. And so when we try and clarify customer experience, we mean that entire collection of touch points, and that's the opportunity, and that's also the challenge. So every touch point, if you think about it, is an opportunity to create value of some sort at the highest level. Create value that drives preference for, as well as an emotional attachment. We talk about emotions in a lot of different cases, but that's actually incredibly important when it comes to thinking about the overall customer experience. And when we talk about it inside MasterCard, we say it's really, driven by three primary factors. Does it do something that I need to do? Is there some kind of utility in that experience? Is it relevant? Does it address my needs? Are we actually serving something that delivers on or exceeds expectations? And also, does it trigger some emotion? Do I walk away with just a positive experience? Emotions can be easy just by making something, easy. So while this may seem easy, the difficult part, and this is how we talk about it inside to those that don't understand this as much, is that the difficult part is that delivering on value depends on an entire ecosystem. And this is the challenge. Like the example that I mentioned with the concierge app. You have to get to a place where you're seeing where are the places that are breaking across the entire customer experience, and what are the things that are contributing to that. It could be a legal policy. It could be some contract we have. It could be a system. It could be so many things. But it's important to be able to see that view as well. And so companies have started to take this very seriously, and we've reached a point where, for example, Delta Airlines for many years was one of America's most hated airlines. And about 3 or 4 years ago, they decided to invest $3 billion in improving its customer experience. And particularly when you think of all the touch points, the touch point for the travel journey itself. And what they did is they invested money to send all of their flight attendants to charm school so that they can provide better service as one part of that effort. And since then, with all sorts of other things that they've been able to do, they have just skyrocketed in terms of customer satisfaction and loyalty, and as well as just the overall business performance of the airline. And a lot of people say that was contributed to a better customer experience. So how do we get there? How many of you have actually worked on a really meaty, deep view of an end-to-end experience map? That's good. Every conference you go to for customer experience, they have journey mapping. I argue that we at UX, we've been doing this for years, but suddenly it's all the rage. They're even developing software tools that automate how you do this and actually assign jobs for particular things that you want to fix. But this is a major link in the way we think, I say as designers, and the ambitions of a larger customer experience. Why it's so important for business, and I think why customer experience speaks, I'm so sorry about this, we didn't check it before. Customer experience speaks the language of business perhaps more than user experience has been able to at this point, partly because of all of these things coming out in the world where Forrester says we're now in the age of the customer. That's the critical thing that's actually going to help drive business for consumers, because everything else, manufacturing, distribution, information, it's all been commodified. Everybody has a way of doing that, but customer experience is hard. And those that can do it really well are differentiating themselves, and business results are showing it. In fact, if they've measured customer experience across a variety of companies, and those that do it really well across the board actually have, I explain that, but they just make more money. And there has been that direct correlation. So you can see why it's very compelling from a business point of view. They understand customer experience. It actually makes sense in terms of what that organization's strategy should be tied to, or how this should be tied to, rather, into an organization's strategy. So here's the thing. I think UX has a big role to play in this world, but often, and I even see it in MasterCard, it's perceived as just another one of many service providers. And I think that's because there's not the link There's the UX team over here, and maybe you do or do not have a customer experience team, but are they connected? How many of you feel like you're in an organization where you have these two types of thinking and they're connected? Anyone? It's hard to see. I only see a few hands. So how do you position this? And that's been one of the challenges that I've been dealing with, and fortunately have been working with a cross-functional team, really looking at the enterprise level, and this is how we're talking about it. Well, first of all, they're not two separate things. Literally, visually positioning it, there's the strategic ambition around customer experience from a company perspective. It makes sense. It drives business. But the user experience, especially as digital technology becomes increasingly more important, and the user experience can play across touch points. It could be physical, it could be digital, but it's critical for driving great customer experience. Okay, that's a start, but still they get confused by CX, UX. And then you have some people in the organization that were there that are in technology and they're starting to do service maps and service design, which is great too, but then that gets really confusing from an organizational perspective when you're thinking about the language thing again. Are you service design? Are you UX? What's the difference? And then we have brand graphic design. And the reason I bring that up is because I think it's something that that's also a siloed element in an organization where you have a team focused on the the brand style guides and how from a whole company perspective. But that's really critical. Your packaging, what that looks like and feels like. Even your sales presentations are important in how they're designed. So we started to say, that's just too complicated. That's not a good way to position it because it's already hard enough just trying to define these two things, so let's just call it experience design. Everything is all of those things contribute to a great experience. And we started to like that idea, and that made a lot of sense. UX was part of that. Visual design, content, all of it was just about designing experiences, but then decided to further simplify it, and you see a lot of organizations going this way until it's just design. And it's not a separate thing, but design is absolutely core and essential to delivering great customer experiences, because you can have all the strategy, you can have all the journey maps in the world, but if you don't have people who can actually get out there and design it in a way that's going to be meaningful and relevant and useful, then you're not going to get as far as you want to get. And so this is a hot topic now. And it comes in and out, but literally like in the last 3 months, there have been some, front of the magazine covers around this idea of design. And it's a great moment. We've been talking about it for years. We've been talking about design thinking, but it seems to come in and out of the conversation. And that's fantastic. And there are even measures about design where companies who have real processes in place, they have a design leader at the very upper echelons of leadership, and that are practicing it with great consistency, actually show a greater return from a company perspective as well. And you can see how businesses can say, oh, I like that. That's great. But the problem is when you even look at those articles that are out there in, I'm not sure if those are things that are common, like Harvard Business Review, or that you even want to read it, but they're interesting. The problem is that there's still two separate conversations. And when you hear the articles and a lot of people talking about design, they're using the same language as customer experience, but then they're focused on design. And rather than having two, who's going to win this battle, why don't we just figure out how they work together? And how, because there are different disciplines, there are different things that customer experience people want to do that design just doesn't, and vice versa. Because neither one is actually going to be useful without the other, in my opinion. So the context for this and why is businesses are becoming extremely complex. So why is design even becoming more important? The cycles, I'm sorry, this is so hard to read. The cycles for sustainable competitive advantages are shorter. For example, W Hotels has a new mobile app that allows you to check in before you get to the hotel and unlock your door with a Bluetooth inside of the hotel. Right now, that's a differentiator. That might be a reason why you'd want to use W, but in 3 years, it's probably going to be common. We're going to get rid of the cards, and it's all going to be digital. That's how fast things happen. Well, probably could be less than that, but things are happening very quickly. Companies are generally struggling. You know this. But again, thinking it from your outside in and how people are seeing things, companies are struggling with how do we become digital in every area, from the employee experience to how they create product extensions in ways that make or enable new things that they weren't able to do before. And digital customer experiences, we're starting to talk that way, are key differentiators, as noted by some of the things we've seen here in Uber and what they've done at the Walt Disney parks. Have any of you been reading about that? Yes? No? Okay, I won't go into that. But so for organizations to survive in this landscape, I am firmly in belief that the CX efforts, insofar as they exist in your organization, actually need to emphasize design as a core ingredient. And so how would we do that? What does that actually mean? And how do you take what we do and start to apply it to some of those bigger problems? So some of the examples that we've been doing inside of MasterCard or talking about rather, is this idea that we need design because design research helps us better understand unmet needs. First point. And I say when designers get involved in creating experiences, they use techniques that involve empathy that optimize for both functional and emotional aspects of an experience in ways that customer experience professionals just aren't there yet. And what we're trying to do is not to leave this as part of the, these practices don't just sit within the design team, but there's something that are practiced by everyone in the business. And in this example, we were trying to create a new mobile travel app, global, focused on a very particular service, but we were trying to understand, what's that unmet need? What's that Uber moment for this app? What can we do that no one else is doing that's going to really deliver something that's really important to our most valued consumer in this case? And so we had a team, a core team, strategic team of business people, technology. We still are mostly working with agencies for design support, but everyone was at the table and everybody on that team had to go out and do user interviews. Not just a design team to come back, but the business people, the O&T people. Oh, I'm sorry, O&T is our word for technology. It's our team, sorry about that acronym. And it was fantastic because everybody came to the table in a very collaborative way, and we mapped out the part of the travel journey based on all of these interviews and synthesized this as a group. It was about 10 people, so it wasn't huge. And from there, started to pull out what are the opportunity areas. We've did some competitive work where we can actually deliver really real value based on what our capabilities are, based on what's right for MasterCard, based on what the user needs were, et cetera, and use this as a moment to actually start to define our strategy for this mobile app. But it was transformative because it actually enabled people, because all of this is about a cultural change, and it helped people to understand, oh, this is the way we need to think. We need to think from the outside in rather than the inside out and just making assumptions. And so this is one way where you can help, where design plays a key role. Another thing is design thinking. We all like to talk about design thinking. Clarifies or can clarify how products and services can really deliver value. And again, instead of leaving this to purely to a design team, we're starting to think of new products, digital products, in a way that didn't exist before. Digital card products, like for example, your plastic card will probably be gone in a few years, and it's all going to be digital. So what does that actually mean for MasterCard? What services, what things can they provide to their issuers? So we're doing a lot of thinking and trying to innovate in that areas, and again, we bring in full teams to do these visualization, collaborative sketching exercises to try and understand how can an experience deliver on this value proposition that we think we've landed on based on some real consumer insights, which preceded this, and bring them together to do sessions, people that have never ever sketched before, people that have never actually, thought they would even do anything like this. Because what we say is, why design is important, because when designers try and solve a problem, they always reach for a Sharpie, not a spreadsheet. Although sometimes we need to do spreadsheets. But how many of you have actually done collaborative sketching with other stakeholders in your business who aren't designers? Good. That's awesome. It's great, right? Yeah. And so this is another way that you can gain collaborative alignment around a direction. You can get people to understand the kind of thinking that's involved, right? Probably preaching to the choir a little bit on this one. We also say to the business that design prototyping helps reduce waste and diminish financial risk. Businesses like to hear that. Not just to do it because we want to do it, but instead of just leaping into something and putting it out in the world without knowing what it is, it's hard for big corporations. Startups do this all the time, but it's hard for big corporations to do this. How many of you have a regular practice of prototyping things? Yes, this is coming more. And how many of you involve people outside of design in your prototyping? Good. So this is another effective way. And we're doing this more and more. We're talking about the range of prototyping from a sketch prototype to a functioning prototype, and always starting with sketches and getting people used to just seeing things like that to be able to assess and to judge, what's actually feasible and what's going to be something that we want to pursue for real as a company. We also talk about design as something that drives our ability to create emotional connections. And this is not just the function, but the aesthetic as well. We have a fortunate situation where we're simultaneously, I don't know how we'll do this, but we're actually undergoing a full company design transformation as well. I mean, a brand design transformation at the same time that we're trying to do the customer experience and design thing that will help make everything more consistent across every touch point. But we talk about how designers actually use techniques to engage customers in ways that a typical customer experience person wouldn't think about it. They're really more focused on how do we fix and optimize, things and make them better, but really bringing the magic of a designer's point of view to something to deliver on this promise. So these are the kinds of questions that we think designers will think about to deliver on the how. This is a output of the app that I was talking about earlier. So one of the things we're saying to the organization is that design is both a practice and a way of thinking. I don't think this is going to be new to any of you, but it's starting to sink in a way that's proving to be very impactful in terms of how people are thinking and what they're doing. It's going to be a very long journey. But you can see small steps being made right now. And we talk a lot about design thinking. One example, many different manifestations. of what this model could look like. Here's one that we're using. I won't need to go through that. But we say that why design is so important to driving a great customer experience is it makes sense of complex problems and all the things that we've been talking about here. It helps us work in a responsive, iterative, and flexible way. That's really important. It's hard to get big companies to start to do that. It imparts a set of principles to all who bring the ideas to life. And it ensures that we focus on the emotional as well as the aesthetic value of an experience, which sometimes gets left behind in some places. And it drives human-centered innovation. Just thinking through the customer experience lens is not always thinking through that perspective. And it's essential for simplifying and humanizing products and services. And all these things are really critical for design. So how are we seeing this as an organization? I gave you some examples of day-to-day experiences, but when you're thinking about an overall business transformation, it's really hard. But everyone, I believe, who has a role, all of you in your company can in design or customer experience, has a role to play. We're very fortunate and we have a cross-functional team. This cannot be led by one person in the organization, but we have a partnership, someone who's in one separate business unit. We have another partner who's in technology, across someone who runs the product management excellence. We're working as a core cross-functional team to help define this framework that can then be applied and used and transferred across the organization. But it really depends on starting with those quick wins and things that you can actually hold up and show to people and say, this is actually what's working. So still at the very beginning, but it all comes back to this, that design is essential as a core ingredient to the overall customer experience. It's just as important from a business perspective. And if we can start to find ways to bring these two together, I think that businesses will find that they're going to have a much better, more, powerful way to actually create great things and great experiences when you pull these things together. So that's really all I wanted to talk about. I hope that was got you thinking about what was happening, or what might be happening in your organization, and how some of the things that you've been hearing at this conference today, and the role that design can play, and how you can actually connect that to a larger business opportunity, because it's something that's, I think, really important to happen. So that's all I have for now.